The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Eleanor sat at her desk, fingers hovering over the keyboard. It was 8:47 a.m., and already she could feel the weight of judgment pressing down on her shoulders. Across the room, a group of young employees laughed raucously about something on their phones, their carefree energy bouncing off the glass walls of the open concept office. She tried to focus on the spreadsheet in front of her, but the sound of hurried footsteps approaching made her heart skip a beat. "Ellie," came the voice she had dreaded hearing all morning. Not because it was particularly cruel or harsh, but because of what it represented. The voice belonged to Connor, the boss's son, who had recently been promoted to director of operations despite having barely graduated from college 2 years ago. He stood there now, his tailored suit hanging awkwardly on his lanky frame, an unreadable expression on his face. His eyes darted briefly to her hands, which were trembling ever so slightly before he spoke again. "Can I see you in my office?" Eleanor nodded, swallowing hard. She didn't need to ask why, deep down she already knew. At 54, she was one of the oldest employees in the company, a relic of a time when experience mattered more than Instagram followers and coding boot camps. Still, she had hoped that the work she'd poured herself into for nearly 2 decades would count for something. As she rose from her chair, every joint seemed to creak louder than usual, drawing unwanted attention from nearby co-workers. Their curious glances burned into her back as she followed Connor down the hallway. His office was pristine, almost sterile, exactly what you'd expect from someone trying too hard to prove themselves. Connor gestured for her to sit across from him, then closed the door behind them with a soft click. The air felt heavier here, suffocating even. He took his seat behind the desk, fidgeting with a pen as if searching for the right words. When he finally spoke, his tone was clipped, professional, but not kind. "Eleanor," he began, avoiding eye contact altogether, "we've decided to go in a different direction." Her stomach dropped. "What does that mean?" she asked, though she already understood perfectly well. "It means your position is being eliminated," he said quickly, as if ripping off a bandage. "We're looking for someone younger, someone fresher. Someone who can bring innovative ideas to the table." The words hit her like a punch to the chest. Younger, fresher, innovative. None of those things applied to her anymore, apparently. She wanted to argue, to remind him that she had built this system, the very software they relied on daily, from scratch. That she had trained half the staff sitting out there, including some of his closest confidants. But instead, she found herself frozen, staring at the man-child across from her, wondering how someone so inexperienced could wield so much power. Connor continued talking, listing vague platitudes about severance packages and exit interviews, but Eleanor tuned him out. Her mind was racing, replaying fragments of conversations she'd had with colleagues over the years. Hadn't they once valued her expertise? Hadn't they praised her dedication during late nights troubleshooting server crashes or implementing new features? Or had all of that faded away the moment gray hairs started appearing at her temples? When the meeting ended, she walked out of his office feeling hollow, like a shell of the person she used to be. Back at her desk, she stared blankly at the computer screen, watching lines of code scroll by like ghosts of her former self. Around her, life carried on as usual. No one seemed to notice or care that she had just been dismissed after giving 20 years of her life to this company. And maybe that hurt the most, the indifference. As the hours dragged on, anger began to simmer beneath the surface. How dare they do this to her? To throw her aside like yesterday's news, all because she didn't fit their vision of fresh? By the time evening rolled around and the office began to empty, Eleanor realized she hadn't packed up her belongings yet. She wasn't ready to leave, not like this. Not without making sure they understood exactly what they were losing. And then it occurred to her, she still had access. Access to everything. Every file, every database, every line of code she had painstakingly written and maintained over the years. A single keystroke could erase it all. Could undo decades of work in seconds. For the first time since the meeting with Connor, a spark ignited within her, a dangerous mix of fury and resolve. She glanced around the deserted office, her fingers twitching above the keyboard. Maybe it was foolish. Maybe it was reckless. But as Eleanor sat there alone, surrounded by the remnants of a career she had loved and lost, she couldn't help but wonder, what if she hit delete? The idea burrowed itself deep into her thoughts, gnawing at her conscience like a persistent itch. Delete. Just one word, 6 letters, capable of unraveling an entire empire she had helped build. As she stared at the glowing monitor, her reflection distorted in the darkened screen, Eleanor wrestled with the enormity of what she was considering. It wasn't just destruction, it was rebellion. A final stand against a world that had deemed her obsolete. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling now not from fear but from adrenaline. She could feel the pulse of possibility coursing through her veins, urging her forward. If she did this, if she erased everything, what would happen next? Would chaos ensue? Would they scramble to rebuild what she had created, only to realize how irreplaceable she truly was? Or would they simply move on, hiring someone else to pick up the pieces while she faded further into obscurity? The thought of being forgotten stung worse than anything else. She remembered the countless sleepless nights spent debugging systems, the endless meetings where she explained technical concepts to people who barely understood them, the moments of triumph when her solutions worked flawlessly. This company wasn't just a job, it was part of her identity. And now they were discarding her like an outdated piece of equipment. With a deep breath, Eleanor opened the main directory of the company's system. Rows upon rows of folders appeared before her, each containing vital information, the backbone of the business. Financial records, client databases, project files, proprietary algorithms, all neatly organized under her meticulous care. Her eyes scanned the list, lingering on the folder labeled Core Systems. Inside lay the heart of the company's operations, the original framework she had designed years ago. Without it, the entire structure would collapse. She clicked on the folder, hesitating only for a second. Her cursor hovered over the red delete button, taunting her with its simplicity. One click. That's all it would take. Yet, even as her finger twitched toward the mouse, doubt crept in. Was this really the answer? To destroy something she had devoted so much of her life to building? Wouldn't that make her no better than Connor, erasing her contributions without a second thought? But then she thought about him again, young, entitled, dismissive, and her resolve hardened. They had underestimated her, treated her as disposable. Now, she would show them the cost of taking her for granted. Slowly, deliberately, she typed a command into the terminal window instead of using the graphical interface. This way, there would be no turning back. No accidental recovery. The deletion process would begin immediately, irreversible and absolute. As the code executed, a wave of exhilaration washed over her. Lines of text scrolled across the screen, confirming the purge. Files disappeared one by one, vanishing into nothingness. For the first time in months, maybe even years, she felt alive. Powerful. In control. The hum of the servers grew quieter, almost mournful, as if the machines themselves understood what was happening. Suddenly, her phone buzzed violently on the desk beside her, snapping her out of the trance. It was a notification from the IT department, critical system failure detected. Panic rippled through the message board channels, followed by frantic calls and emails. Employees who had ignored her earlier rushed past her cubicle, their faces pale with fear. Some shouted questions into their headsets, others frantically rebooted computers that refused to cooperate. The chaos spread like wildfire, consuming the once orderly office. Eleanor watched silently, her lips curling into a bitter smile. They were scrambling now, desperate to salvage what remained. But it was too late. She had ensured that. The system she had built was gone, dismantled brick by brick until nothing remained but ash. And yet, amid the pandemonium, she felt a pang of guilt. Not for what she had done, but for the people caught in the crossfire, the ones who hadn't wronged her, who depended on these systems to do their jobs. People like Sarah from accounting, who always brought her coffee on Mondays, or James from marketing, who often stopped by to chat about his kids. Still, she reminded herself, this wasn't about them. It was about sending a message. About proving that age didn't equate to irrelevance. That experience mattered, even in a world obsessed with youth and innovation. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, as the commotion reached a fever pitch. Eventually, someone would figure out what had happened. Someone would trace the source of the deletion back to her. But by then, it wouldn't matter. She had already won. Or so she thought. By midnight, the office was eerily quiet, save for the occasional hum of emergency backup systems struggling to keep the skeletal remains of the network operational. Eleanor lingered at her desk, unwilling to leave just yet. The act of deletion had given her a fleeting sense of vindication, but now, in the aftermath, the weight of her actions began to settle heavily on her shoulders. She stared at the blank screen, her mind replaying the day's events like a movie stuck on repeat. The chaos, the panic, the looks of disbelief, they were all seared into her memory. But it wasn't guilt that kept her rooted to her chair. It was curiosity. What would happen tomorrow? How far-reaching would the consequences of her actions be? The company had grown exponentially since she first joined, branching out into international markets and acquiring smaller firms along the way. Entire departments relied on the systems she had erased. Sales pipelines would grind to a halt. Client contracts could be jeopardized. Stock prices might plummet. The ripple effect was unpredictable, and that uncertainty both thrilled and terrified her. A sudden noise startled her, a soft knock at the door. She turned sharply, her heart pounding. No one should still be here. Everyone else had left hours ago, retreating home to deal with the fallout remotely. Who could possibly remain in this ghostly shell of an office? "Ellie?" came a hesitant voice from the doorway. It was Sarah, the accountant who always brought her coffee. Her face was pale, her hair disheveled, and she clutched a tablet tightly to her chest as though it might protect her from whatever storm was brewing. I saw your light on." Eleanor blinked, momentarily speechless. Of all the people she expected to confront her, Sarah was the last. Kind, unassuming Sarah, who rarely ventured beyond her spreadsheets and financial reports. Seeing her standing there now, wide-eyed and vulnerable, made Eleanor acutely aware of the human cost of her revenge. "I couldn't sleep," Eleanor said finally, her voice hoarse. "Too much on my mind." Sarah stepped closer, her gaze flickering between Eleanor and the darkened computer screen. "It's bad, Ellie. Really bad. Everything's gone, the payroll system, the CRM, our entire project management platform. We don't know how we're going to recover. Some people are saying it'll take weeks, maybe months, to get things running again." Eleanor nodded slowly, pretending to absorb the information as though she hadn't orchestrated the disaster herself. "Do they have any idea what caused it?" Sarah hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. "Not officially, no. But rumors are spreading fast. People are starting to ask questions. You know how it is, when something this big happens, everyone looks for someone to blame." The implication hung heavy in the air, unspoken but unmistakable. Eleanor forced herself to meet Sarah's eyes, searching for judgment or accusation. Instead, she found only concern. Genuine, heartfelt concern. It was unsettling. "You didn't deserve what happened today," Sarah said quietly, surprising Eleanor. "Getting fired like that, it was wrong. Age shouldn't matter. Experience should count for something." For a moment, Eleanor forgot to breathe. She hadn't anticipated sympathy, least of all from someone who had nothing to gain by offering it. Her throat tightened, and she looked away, unable to hold Sarah's gaze any longer. The anger that had fueled her earlier began to waver, replaced by an ache she couldn't quite name. "I just wish there was another way," Sarah continued, her voice tinged with desperation. "A way to fix this without ruining lives. Because that's what's happening, Ellie. People are scared. Jobs are at risk. Families depend on this company. And honestly, I'm worried about you too." Eleanor stiffened. "Why would you worry about me?" "Because I know you," Sarah replied simply. "You've always been the steady one, the reliable one. The one we all turn to when things fall apart. But tonight," she trailed off, shaking her head. "Tonight feels different. Like you're carrying something heavy. Something you shouldn't have to carry alone." The word struck a nerve, piercing through the armor Eleanor had constructed around herself. For years, she had prided herself on being indispensable, on being the backbone of the company. But now, stripped of her title and responsibilities, she realized how fragile that identity truly was. Without her role, who was she? What purpose did she serve? Before she could respond, Sarah placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Whatever you're thinking, whatever you're planning, please, don't shut us out. Let us help you. Let me help you." Tears welled up in Eleanor's eyes, blurring her vision. She wanted to tell Sarah everything, to confess her part in the destruction, to explain the rage and pain that had driven her to such extremes. But the words caught in her throat, tangled in a web of pride and shame. Instead, she managed a weak nod, her defenses crumbling under the weight of Sarah's kindness. As Sarah pulled up a chair and sat beside her, Eleanor felt a strange warmth blooming in her chest. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, connection was possible. That perhaps, amidst the wreckage she had created, there was still room for redemption. Outside, the city lights flickered faintly against the night sky, casting long shadows across the office floor. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, blending with the low murmur of voices filtering through the walls. The world moved on, oblivious to the turmoil unfolding within these four walls. And as Eleanor sat there, sharing silence with Sarah, she allowed herself to imagine, for the first time in years, a future untethered from the past. As dawn broke over the city, Eleanor found herself sitting in the same chair, staring out at the rising sun. Sarah had stayed with her through the night, offering quiet companionship rather than probing questions. Together, they watched as the office slowly came back to life, employees trickling in, bleary-eyed and anxious, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The air buzzed with tension, but also determination. It was clear that no one wanted to give up, not yet. Eleanor knew she couldn't stay hidden forever. Sooner or later, the truth would come out. She had caused this catastrophe, and while it had started as an act of defiance, she now understood the gravity of her actions. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about everyone whose livelihoods depended on the company's survival. And deep down, she still cared about them. About the people who had once valued her expertise, even if they had momentarily forgotten it. Taking a deep breath, Eleanor stood up and turned to Sarah. "I need to fix this," she said firmly, her voice steady for the first time in days. Sarah looked at her, startled. "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly what I said. I'm the one who deleted the system. I'm the reason everything fell apart. And I'm the only one who can put it back together." For a moment, Sarah simply stared at her, processing the confession. Then, to Eleanor's surprise, she smiled, a small knowing smile. "I figured as much," she admitted. "But I didn't say anything because I knew you'd figure it out eventually. You always do." Eleanor felt a lump rise in her throat. She wanted to ask how Sarah could trust her after what she'd done, but there was no time for explanations. Instead, she grabbed her laptop and headed toward the IT department, where a huddle of panicked technicians was frantically trying to salvage what little data remained. When she walked in, all eyes turned to her. Some faces were angry, others confused, but most were desperate. Connor, the boss's son, stood near the center of the room, looking more frazzled than she'd ever seen him. He opened his mouth to speak, but Eleanor cut him off before he could get a word out. "This is my fault," she announced, her voice ringing clear across the room. Silence fell immediately, every pair of eyes locking onto hers. "I deleted the system. I thought I had a good reason, but I was wrong. What I did was reckless, selfish, and unfair, to all of you. But I'm here now to make it right." The room erupted into murmurs, some skeptical, others relieved. Connor stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You're admitting to sabotaging the entire company?" he asked, his tone sharp. "Yes," Eleanor replied without hesitation. "And I'll accept whatever consequences come with that. But first, let me fix what I broke." To her astonishment, Connor didn't fire her on the spot, or call security. Instead, he glanced around the room, gauging the reactions of his team. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of resignation. "Fine. Do what you have to do. But if you screw this up," he let the threat hang unfinished, though it was clear enough. Eleanor nodded briskly and got to work. For the next 72 hours, she barely slept, fueled by coffee and sheer willpower. With Sarah's help, and surprisingly, the cooperation of several former colleagues, she pieced together fragments of the old system from backups and archived files. It wasn't perfect, and it certainly wasn't fast, but bit by bit, the foundation began to stabilize. During those grueling days, something remarkable happened. As Eleanor worked tirelessly alongside her coworkers, rebuilding what she had destroyed, she noticed a shift in their attitudes. At first, they approached her cautiously, unsure whether to trust her again. But as they saw her dedication, the way she poured every ounce of her knowledge and skill into restoring the system, they began to soften. Conversations resumed. Collaborations formed. By the end of the third day, the atmosphere in the office felt different, not like it had before but better. Stronger. On the morning of the fourth day, Eleanor stood in front of the assembled staff, exhausted but triumphant. The core systems were operational again, albeit in a stripped-down form that would require weeks of refinement. Still, it was enough to keep the company running while they rebuilt the rest. "I owe each of you an apology," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "What I did was unforgivable. I let my anger cloud my judgment, and I hurt a lot of people in the process. I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, or maybe ever, but I hope you'll give me the chance to earn back your trust." The room was silent for a long moment. Then, to her amazement, someone started clapping. Slowly, tentatively, others joined in until the entire office erupted into applause. Tears filled Eleanor's eyes as she realized they weren't cheering for her. They were celebrating resilience, unity, and the possibility of redemption. In the weeks that followed, Eleanor threw herself into her work with renewed purpose. Connor, perhaps humbled by the experience, offered her a new role, senior advisor to the leadership team. It wasn't her old job, but it was something far more meaningful, a seat at the table where decisions were made. More importantly, it gave her the opportunity to mentor younger employees, passing on the wisdom she had accumulated over decades. One afternoon, as she sat in her newly assigned office reviewing project proposals, Sarah appeared in the doorway holding 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need a break," she said with a grin. Eleanor smiled gratefully, accepting the cup. "Thanks. I needed this." Sarah settled into the chair across from her, glancing around the cozy space. "Feels good, doesn't it? Having a fresh start." "It does," Eleanor admitted, sipping her coffee. "I never thought I'd feel this way again, like I have something to contribute. Like I matter." "You've always mattered," Sarah said firmly. "Sometimes it just takes losing everything to remember why." They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that comes from shared hardship and newfound hope. Outside, the city bustled with life, oblivious to the transformation happening within those walls. But inside, Eleanor knew she had found not just a second chance, but a new beginning, one built on forgiveness, connection, and the unshakable belief that no one is ever truly obsolete.